Hi ladies and gents. Tonight we wander somewhere older than time and softer than dreams, to a place where sandals slap stone floors, candles flicker low, and the only real drama is whether Brother Oswin remembered to feed the scriptorium cat. Let us turn back now, floating gently over rolling hills and sheep-dotted meadows, past the smoke-threaded chimneys of quaint little towns, and through the wooden gates of a world that called itself civilized. Although we might politely beg to differ. Tudor England, you've arrived softly and unsuspectingly in the year 1521, a rather damp year. Not catastrophic damp, just perpetually soggy. You, dear listener, are standing at the edge of a bustling Tudor village, wearing approximately 3 fewer layers than you ought to be, and already regretting everything. The first thing you notice, the smell. It meets you like an enthusiastic handshake and lingers like uncomfortable eye contact. A rich tapestry of mud, manure, wood smoke, boiled cabbage, unwashed humanity, and something delicate and mysterious that might be pickled eel. In Tudor England, everyone smells like they forgot to open a window. But don't be alarmed. That's just how they knew each other. Scents were practically part of one's social identity. Ah yes, that's Aunt Mildred, blend of hayloft, onions and melancholy. Wandering further, you find yourself on a narrow, winding high street. It is not paved. No Tudor street ever aspired to such extravagance. Instead, it's a pungent slip and slide of clay and compost, and very occasionally, the contents of a chamber pot, if you don't watch your timing. Oh yes, perhaps we should talk about chamber pots. The Tudors did not yet enjoy plumbing, which means that relieving oneself was an event with consequences. You'd do your business in a bowl, then toss it out the window, with a polite suggestion to those below. Gardez l'eau, French for watch out for the water, though it rarely helped. So wear a hood, walk near the wall, and never trust a second-story shutter. Feeling peckish? Regrettable decision. The Tudor diet is a revolving door of beige despair. If you're a peasant, and let's be honest, you are, your day begins and ends with pottage, a sort of eternally boiling stew that contains everything and nothing. Last Tuesday's turnip, still in there. A lucky bit of bacon from Easter? Perhaps. A hint of mystery? Absolutely. Bread is a daily affair, but good luck getting any of the white stuff. That's for the fancy folk. You'll gnaw your way through rye or barley, almost certainly with grit in it, since flour was sifted about as precisely as medieval dental care, which was non-existent. Your teeth, by the way, are already surrendering. Speaking of oral disasters, toothbrushes do not exist. If you're lucky, you might use a twig. If you're unlucky, you'll make do with vigorous rinsing and a casual disregard for gums. Smiling was best kept to a minimum for the sake of public morale. You wander into the town square, drawn by the dulcimer sounds of a lute and the spirited hollering of a fishmonger. Market day. Splendid. It's a festival of mild fraud, spoiled eggs, crafty waits, and pies that possibly contain pigeon. You ask someone what kind of meat is in the pie, and they reply cryptically, "It was moving yesterday." You make direct eye contact and back away slowly. One stall sells cures, potions promising to fix your melancholy, your gout, or your unfortunate rash. All of them appear to be mostly wine and crushed snails. Don't worry, it won't work, but it might distract your body long enough to forget it was ill. Oh, and your job? Well, assuming you didn't bring one with you from the future, time travel not being particularly great for resumes, you're likely a field labourer. That means dawn till dusk, with a hand plough and ominously calloused fingers. No gloves, no sunscreen, and absolutely no OSHA. And did someone say fashion? If you're hoping to dazzle in Tudor style, dress expectations down. Unless you're nobility, your wardrobe is mostly wool. Same colours, same shapes, day after day, like the world's most underfunded theatre troupe. Buttons are rare, fasteners are elusive, but layers are abundant, since windows are decorative and central heating is imaginary. But don't get too disheartened. There's always the church, a cool, shadowed stone space filled with incense, Latin chants, and the echoing scuffs of wooden pews. A place for prayer, pondering, or just resting your tired feet and basking in the vibe of eternal damnation. You sit in the back, soaking in the scent of candle wax and old wood, and for a moment, just a moment, it's quiet, peaceful. The priest shuffles past you in robes stitched by someone probably blind. He mispronounces your name in the prayer list, but that's okay. In Tudor England, even last rites came with a spelling error, and as the bells begin their gentle toll, calling every sheep, shepherd, and slightly embarrassed sinner to vespers, you realize the sun is setting on your first bewildering mud-speckled day in this ancient land. Go ahead now. Pull your blanket close. Imagine the hush of evening fires and the sleepy murmur of geese being herded homeward. And if you've enjoyed your brief plunge into Tudor survival, press that like button before your eyelids press themselves. Good night for now. The first thing that will strike you, besides the manure, is the smell. Ah yes, the fragrance of Tudor England. A robust bouquet of wet wool, fish guts, unwashed humans, and the occasional waft of burning hair. It's not that people didn't want to be clean. It's simply that nobody had explained the germ theory of disease just yet. And good old-fashioned filth was somehow seen as comforting. Sort of like a muddy security blanket. Now, softly imagine you wake up in the year 1523. You open, your eyes expecting the glow of your smartphone. Perhaps a gentle lo-fi beat murmuring in the background. Instead, you're greeted by dim daylight crawling through oiled parchment windows. It's what passed for glass. And honestly, it wasn't winning any transparency awards. The walls are timber and wattle, which sounds cozy until you realize that draftiness, not insulation, is the house specialty. Your bed is a lumpy straw mattress, possibly shared with several siblings, at least one goat, and, how to put this gently, an ambitious population of fleas. There's a wooden chamber pot nearby. You will become intimately familiar with this item. But don't worry, the entire street collectively empties theirs into the open gutter outside, sometimes with a warning shout of "Gardy-loo" before launching the contents. Sometimes. It's hard to describe just how quickly your modern self would start to mentally unravel. Your first instinct might be to find a bathroom and brush your teeth. Well, that toothbrush, if you're lucky enough to procure one, is made from hog bristle nailed into a bit of wood, and the toothpaste, powdered charcoal, with maybe some crushed mint if you're feeling dangerously luxurious. Soap, in the Tudor world, exists, sort of. It's made from animal fat and lye, which is both highly caustic and the kind of thing that today would come with a skull and crossbones warning label. The good news, it keeps rats away. The bad news, it may keep your skin away too. Now let's dress for the day, shall we? In theory, you have choices, much like modern clothing stores. In practice, your wardrobe contains two garments, something stained and woolen for everyday labor, and something also stained and woolen for Sunday church services. Clothing is not washed so much as beaten near a river and prayed over. Linen undergarments are common among those who can afford them. but changing them is a monthly affair, or possibly seasonal. One tunic, many weeks. Your shoes, wooden clogs or patterns, essentially ancient platform sandals designed to elevate you above the generous sea of street muck. Durable, yes. Quietly fashionable, not particularly. Comfortable, only if you associate comfort with walking on small overturned barrels. Food's on your mind, but don't get too excited. Breakfast doesn't really exist in any meaningful way for a Tudor commoner. If you're lucky, you may beg a crust of coarse bread nearly indistinguishable from gravel. Anything resembling fluffy toast is centuries away. An avocado hasn't even been discovered yet. The main diet consists of pottage, a sort of medieval stew made from oats, onions and regret, sometimes with cabbage or bits of salted fish tossed in for flair. Meat is mostly off limits unless you're nobility or in possession of an extremely persuasive chicken. Salt was the MVP of preservation, transforming any unfortunate bit of old meat into a salt lick for humans. And then the water. Oh, dear. You'll quickly learn that the water is not for drinking. Not unless you also fancy cholera, dysentery, or an early and dramatic departure from this medieval escapade. Instead, people drank ale. Weak, lukewarm, and brewed by nearly every household. It was the safe alternative. For children, the elderly, and even, yes, dogs. Everyone was at least slightly buzzed all the time. It's probably the only thing keeping the Tudors from panicking about the smell. This paints a rather earthy picture, doesn't it? The modern senses rebel. Your teeth ache to floss. Your hands reach for a sanitizing wipe that won't come. But remember, to the average Tudor, you'd be the one who smells odd. With your lavender products, waxed eyebrows and distressing lack of lice. You've made it through morning, barely. You haven't yet been arrested, caught the plague, or fallen down a well. But hold on to your bonnet, because next, it's time to find a job. Or at least a way to pretend to work hard enough that someone else doesn't report you to the constable. Gently now, breathe out. The stink of the 1500s may be overwhelming, but the pace of history remains delightfully drowsy. If you've ever strolled confidently into your kitchen at 3 a.m., wearing socks and a sense of entitlement, brace yourself. Because in Tudor England, your kitchen wasn't just a few feet away. In fact, it wasn't your kitchen at all. It belonged to your lord, your manor, or possibly just to pure chaos. Kitchens in the 1500s were wilder, smokier, and more socially stratified than most royal courts. And if you suddenly woke up in one, transported from modern life, well, you'd stand a better chance of piloting a submarine with a baguette. Let's start with the aromas. Today, your modern culinary air might be a light mix of oat milk lattes, stale banana bread, and maybe something suspicious fermenting in the vegetable drawer. But step into a Tudor kitchen, and your nostrils would be assaulted by a giddy ensemble of boiling offal, wood smoke, open fire splatter, and whatever game bird had recently been defeathered with mildly unconvincing enthusiasm. The Tudor kitchen was less culinary art and more controlled village bonfire with gravy. Sure, large homes like Hampton Court had impressive kitchen complexes. 55 rooms just for cooking. But don't imagine a serene culinary sanctuary of white tiles and quaint hanging herbs. This was more like an industrial meat circus, and it was hot. Not cozy jumper, marshmallows by the fire hot, but blast furnace. Why is my hair singed again hot? Open hearths blazed for hours, cauldrons boiled, people sweated into everything, including your dinner. Speaking of people, let's discuss the cast. A Tudor kitchen wasn't a solo operation. If you were a noble, or even mildly someone, you'd have a bevy of employees running things, Cooks, spit boys, pie bakers, saucemen. Yes, the sauceman was a real position. And yes, I still wish it were my job. And the all-important turnbroche, a lad tasked solely with turning the roasting spit manually all day long. Often, this job was given to small boys, or mechanically speaking, to dogs. Yes, dogs. Specially bred turnspit dogs ran in hamster wheel style contraptions, powering the spit like the most unfortunate sous chefs in history. Try explaining that to your local animal rights group. But perhaps the most harrowing part for the modern visitor to this culinary cubist painting wasn't the meat, or the heat, or even the dog-powered engineering, but good old-fashioned food safety. The Tudor approach to storing meat was optimistic. More, I believe in miracles than I trust thermodynamics. Preserving meat meant salting, smoking it to within an inch of its skeletal dignity, or just eating it quickly and hoping for the best. Freshness was measured on a sliding scale of smell and denial. And really, your digestive system would already be in revolt. You've just been pulled from a world of sourdough starters and probiotics, and now you're gnawing on mutton that's been subtly aging in a not quite cold pantry. Sure, the banquet might feature an elaborate pie shaped like a fortress, or a baked swan with gilded feathers, but behind every culinary showpiece was a chorus of undercooked danger and possibly a surprise weevil. Then there's water. Or rather, the fairy tale everyone in Tudor England told themselves about water. It was often safer to drink ale, weak, lightly fermented, but still, they weren't alcoholics. They were just thirsty and trying not to die. If you tried insisting on fresh, purified water in a Tudor kitchen, someone would probably assume you were planning poison, and then you'd be the main course at a very different sort of banquet. Now, imagine you, today's you, marching in with your stainless steel bottle, asking whether any of the meats are gluten-free or if the pigeon was ethically sourced. Let's be honest, you wouldn't make it 5 minutes. You'd either be laughed out of the scullery or accidentally roasted next to the pork. Your lack of wood chopping, dog wheel operating, lard splattering experience would mark you as wildly suspicious. Perhaps foreign, possibly a witch. So no, you wouldn't thrive in the Tudor kitchen, but you might appreciate, from a safe distance of 500 years and a full stomach, just how much grunt work went into simply not starving. Next time you microwave your leftovers, raise an eyebrow to the turnspit dog. He walked so you could reheat. Now, take a deep breath. Let the scent of imaginary rosemary and imagined open hearths drift from your thoughts. There's more Tudor trouble ahead, but for now, relax and let your mind quietly slip past the kitchens and into the slightly riskier territory of Tudor fashion. Picture this. You've stumbled bleary-eyed into Tudor England, freshly plopped from the cozy density of your duvet into the crisp, muddy dawn of the 1500s. The roosters are crowing, obnoxiously. A distant bell tolls from a church that looks positively haunted, and your very first thought is, where's the bathroom? Spoiler alert, there isn't one. Welcome to the world of Tudor hygiene, or rather, a spirited lack thereof. Your modern inclinations, daily showers, toothbrushes, and a deep-seated fear of body odor, are about to go to war with a culture that thought water might actually kill you. Not metaphorically, literally. Let's begin with bathing, or the tender absence of it. You might ask your host, perhaps a merchant in a modest timber-framed house, or a serving wench at the local inn, where you could find the washroom, only to be met with a confused tilt of the head, as though you'd asked for a unicorn with hot towels. Full-body baths were rare luxuries, often reserved for the rich or the unhinged. The average person might splash water on their face once a day, but anything more was considered flirtatiously excessive. And that's on holidays. This is partly because water was suspect, dangerous even. Standing water bred disease. Flowing water wandered through questionable bits of urban livestock before making its way to homes. And so, for many, perfume conquered cleanliness. A spritz of rosewater, or perhaps lavender tied discreetly to one's undergarments, was considered a viable alternative to actual bathing. To brush one's teeth, ah yes, one would need a twig, a chewing stick, if you like, some mixed ash or honey with crushed herbs to scrub their teeth. Although the Tudors were pleasantly and unknowingly ahead of their time in this regard. Sugar hadn't quite ravaged every molar yet, so teeth were often in surprisingly good condition, especially early in the era. However, the invention of toothpaste as we know it wasn't even on the mood board yet. And dental floss, that's a cruel joke. Now, let us turn to where all things must, eventually, go. The lavatory, the privy, the jakes. Whatever you choose to call it, you'll likely find it at the rear of the yard in a charming little wooden hut. Or, if you're in the city, astride a creaky bench, precariously balanced over a cesspit. No plumbing, no dignity. And if you were royal, things didn't improve so much as become stranger. Allow me to introduce the groom of the stool, an actual court position, paid handsomely, whose job it was to help the monarch do their business. Yes, they really were that close to power. They kept the towels, managed the chamber pot logistics, and allegedly kept a kind ear for any throne room confessions. Truly, they were the early modern version of your group chat confidant. To maintain personal freshness, one might change underclothes. In modern terms, that's swapping out your only pair of linen drawers once a week and feeling smugly sophisticated about it. Wool was the preferred outer layer, warm, plentiful, and catastrophically itchy by our standards. Linen, which touched the skin, was easier to wash, which is to say people threw it in a cauldron once in a blue moon and stirred it like a stew. And the smells. We must speak of the smells, though gently, as a lullaby to your senses. Life in Tudor England was a bouquet, a wild, bold arrangement of wood smoke, wet straw, horse, tallow candles, and people. The scent of humanity, unadorned and unapologetically ripe. It wasn't so much that no one smelled, it was that they all equally smelled. And so, in a feat of collective olfactory Stockholm syndrome, it simply wasn't remarked upon. You, poor time-travelling tulip, would stick out immediately, not just for your dialect or your genes, but for being oddly clean, suspicious, possibly French, and everyone knows you must keep an eye on the French. The good news, you'd get used to it. Eventually, our noses, like our schedules, adapt. And while your modern body might rebel at first, you'll soon find comfort in the rhythm of unhurried filth, the quiet pride of dabbing one's temples with rosewater and calling it a morning rinse. But should you grow weary of grime and chamber pots, remember, there's nobility to be found too, or at least a passing chance of a cleaner floor. So let's slowly wander toward the shimmering gates of the Tudor court, where wealth sparkles and power perfumes the air with something slightly more pleasant or perilous. By now, you've landed with both slightly swollen feet into the stinking mud of Tudor England. And I do mean mud. There's no trim little cobblestone path for your gently modern souls. No, you are ankle deep in a thick, grimy stew of dirt, dung, and a mystery squish that may or may not have been yesterday's dinner or a chamber pot misadventure. Welcome to the street. You step forward, carefully now, trying not to let the contents of your shoes become sentient, and look around. What you see is a flurry of mostly brownish people in mostly brownish clothing, all bustling past without so much as a second glance. You want to ask someone for directions. "Excuse me, my good fellow, might you tell me where I could wash my hands?" But that's where the first real hurdle of your Tudor immersion crops up. Language. Yes, it's English out there. Sort of. But not your English. Not even your grandmother's English. No loyal listener. This is Shakespearean salad of syllables English, where even a simple greeting sounds like a riddle wrapped in lace. A man might tip his cap, if he owns one, and say, "God gie ye good morrow," and you'll be left nodding politely and mouthing the word morrow like a confused time traveller in a Renaissance fair. And heaven help you if you need to negotiate anything. Let's say a spontaneous desire arises, perhaps a meat pie, because nothing screams culture shock like eating mystery animal from a street vendor with suspicious teeth. You shuffle to the pie seller's rickety wooden stand, peer down at the questionable wares, some already hosting a small convention of flies, and muster a request. You, "Hello, could I buy one of those pies, please?" Pie seller, squinting with suspicion. "Would ye then bargain for yon shepherd's wife's minced bowl?" You smile. They frown. The flies are winning. Eventually, coins change hands. You're pretty sure you overpaid, and also that you've just purchased a pie filled with yesterday's regret. But you're hungry, so you take a bite, and you regret it instantly. Spices are medieval roulette. A Tudor cook might throw in cinnamon, cloves, or, on a wild day, gunpowder. Combine that with minced offcuts of, let's call it, meatish product, and topped with a crust that's more armour than pastry, and you've just sampled one of the more famous delicacies of the land. Speaking of eating, let's now whisper delicately about digestion. The Tudor diet was not your microbiome's best friend. Bread, beer, and meats marinated in guesswork, ingredients that your modern stomach, raised on probiotic yogurt and gentle kale, is unlikely to process peacefully. Within hours, you may feel the need for a facility. And this leads us to our next misfortune, the truly operatic failure that is the Tudor toilet. You will not find a white porcelain oasis. No, what you'll find is perhaps a hole in a wooden bench, perched over a cesspit, and shared communally by many. In cities, that stagnant lagoon of humanity's less poetic outputs might be positioned not far from where someone is making soup. Truly, the Tudor experience was one long symphony in E minor hygiene. And now, imagine the horror, your horror, as you realize there is no toilet paper, just moss, leaves, or, if you're lucky, the back page of a poorly written Protestant pamphlet. Moments like these tend to embed in the memory, don't they? A screaming chorus of your senses, not just smell, but touch and betrayal. You may well weep. It's allowed. Emotional outbursts in Tudor England were frequent and often inspired by the full range of institutional discomforts. Of course, if your moaning draws attention, don't be surprised when a local informs you, not unkindly, that your behaviour resembles that of a melancholic goat and recommends leeching or a brisk walk through a plague field. And still, somehow, it's not all bad. A child skips past, dragging a hoop with a stick and laughing like geography hasn't failed his shoes. There's music somewhere, a hurdy-gurdy whining its little wooden heart out, and the bells of the church begin to toll, telling everyone it's 5 o'clock, or possibly that someone's sick, married, dead, or King Henry's remarried again. Hard to say without context. You lean wearily against a timbered wall, your feet squelching with unlabeled regret, and you sigh. One step further in, one flush further back. But perhaps, if you can, and just make it through nightfall, and perhaps find someplace dry and unoccupied by rats the size of domestic cats, you'll get another chance tomorrow. Let's glide gently now into the dusky Tudor evening, as the dark cloaks the mess and mystery in merciful shadow, and something or someone calls softly in the fog ahead, with the rising sun barely warming the leaded glass windows of your newly constructed hypothetical Tudor nightmare. You stumble out of your straw-stuffed mattress sweating and confused. Why are your feet so cold? Because the floor is stone. Why do your lungs feel like they've been sandpapered with pea soup? Because the entire house smells like fire, meat, damp wool, and a touch of sewage for flair. Welcome to Tudor England, where air freshener comes in the form of someone opening a window and immediately regretting it. And now you've realized something terrifying. You need to go. But not just go, go. Ah yes, the Tudor loo. Perhaps in your 21st century slumber, you'd imagined a tidy chamber pot in an ensuited corner. Maybe a quaint privy beneath a blooming trellis. No, my friend, your bathroom options are rather more medieval in tone. If you're lucky, and I use that term very loosely, you might find a basic wooden seat over a pit, coyly named the garderobe. A sharp little hole perched above a vertical shaft of human despair. There's no plumbing, naturally. Waste drops into a collection pit below, which might be emptied by a gong farmer. A man paid a few pence and offered zero social respect to shovel out human waste in the middle of the night. And yes, it smelled exactly like you're imagining, but warmer. The more adventurous Tudors were occasional fans of the close stool, a wooden commode lined with a chamber pot that you could fancy up with velvet cushions. Because why shouldn't your bottom experience gentle luxury in a time devoid of antibiotics? And if you're truly down on your luck, outhouses. Quite literally, dabbling in the outdoors with a squatting stick and an audience of unimpressed chickens. Wiping materials. Let's not glorify this. Moss, leaves, frayed linen rags, or if you're elite, a bit of the wool cloth hanging around, carefully reused. Toilet paper wouldn't be invented for centuries, which means you'll need to throw away your fragile modern sensibilities and embrace the gentle exfoliating horror of winter bark. Now, you may be wondering, with all this unmentionable unpleasantness, how do these fine folk stay clean? The answer, softly and tragically, is they mostly don't. Bathing was considered a suspicious activity, not just inconvenient, but downright medically questionable. Many believed that hot water could open your pores and let in disease. Some bathed maybe a few times a year, mostly on special occasions. Nobles might enjoy a steamy soak in a wooden tub dragged into the room and filled bucket by laborious bucket, scented with rose petals or herbs to distract from the fact you're marinating in ambient sadness. Soap, often made from rendered animal fat and ash, doubled as a fine skin irritant. But the common folk, rivers, ponds, seasonal rain, some might use a cloth dipped in vinegar for a brisk horror movie scrub. To be clear, Tudors weren't unaware of the concept of cleanliness. They definitely noticed smells. Cities, even the tiny ones, reeked. But washing was more about swapping out your linen shirt than lathering up. The undershirt absorbed your sweat, and washing it served a dual purpose: laundry and deodorant. So you, dear modern time traveller, would walk through your Tudor village with a grimace, not unlike someone who just stepped in something dreadful, which, coincidentally, is also very likely. Random puddles could be anything really. Waste disposal, straight out the window, literally. Morning chamber pots flung into the streets with a polite shout of "Gardy-loo," meaning, roughly, "Duck unless you want to relive my dinner." And your desperate escape to any kind of freshness ends at the nostrils of a Tudor market, where raw meat and day-old fish shimmer atop fly-swathed stalls, mingling scents of brine, blood, and peasant ale. A perfume candle-hop critical mass. But there might be charm yet. Lavender tucked into bodices. Pomanders stuffed with cloves and musk, passed under noses with flair. Gentlefolk carried scent balls on strings like olfactory talismans. A little spice, a little citrus, a valiant attempt to ward off the daily aroma of a civilization trying very hard not to smell like itself. And amidst this, all bracingly filthy, perpetually fragrant, it's quite touching in a way that people still courted, composed poetry, and fell in love, while wearing 15 layers of wool and trying very hard to pretend they couldn't smell anything at all. We'll speak softly of morning strolls next time, the curious clattering sounds of cartwheels and wooden clogs, and how Tudor England greeted the day with equal parts bustle and mystery. Let's pretend just for a drowsy moment that you've survived your first steps in Tudor England, the mud, the chamber pots, the suspicious fish pies. Let's say you've even figured out how to not sneeze in front of royalty, which in this period might be considered an act of uncouth rebellion. Bravo. But there's one small thing you're forgetting, dear time traveller. A thing that might make or break you in this odd, breeches-clad world. How to talk to people. For starters, you can't just walk up and say, "Hey." The word simply doesn't exist in its modern form. In fact, doing that might earn you a hard stare, or worse, a backhanded blessing from someone who thinks you've been touched by the devil, or at least bad manners. Instead, Tudor pleasantries were elaborate, verbose curtsies of the tongue. "God give you good morrow" was a perfectly normal way to say hello before breakfast. And if someone greeted you with, "How now, good fellow?" they weren't confused about bovine sounds. They were just being friendly. Try to strike up a conversation too casually, and you'd be a walking scandal. And if you dared to speak out of turn, especially with anyone in lace, your fate might include stocks, fines, or a lecture by someone with a whispery beard and very stern shoes. Even the names you call people matter immensely. Suppose you meet a man named Sir John. No, you do not call him John. Not unless you're intimately acquainted, like swaddled in the same wool blanket levels of familiarity. You'd refer to him as Sir John, or more appropriately, just your worship, if you're feeling reverent, which, for your survival, you should be. Tudor egos were delicate soufflés. Understate their title, and it flops. Overdo it, and they'll think you're mocking them. It's a linguistic tightrope walk without a net, while everyone's armed with very judgmental eyebrows. This, of course, doesn't even scratch the surface of accents. You see, the English spoken in Tudor times certainly resembled modern English in the same way a hedgehog resembles a koala. Fluffier than you expect, but also full of sharp surprises. The great vowel shift was still chugging along like a runaway mule cart, which meant folks were actively changing how they pronounced words mid-conversation, possibly even mid-breath. A simple word like food might sound more like fode, and house might come out as whose. Honestly, it's not unlike sitting in on a conversation between pirates who've taken a few fancy elocution lessons. But let's say you've managed a conversation without insulting someone's bloodline or confusing a baker's wife with a nun. Good job. Here's another hurdle. Everyone's watching your body language, The Tudors were disturbingly observant when it came to posture, gestures, and proximity. Too much eye contact, aggressive, not enough, suspicious, slouching, shameful, crossing your arms. You might as well declare a small rebellion. And a gentle warning, keep your hands to yourself. A handshake might be acceptable among equals, and only if you are trying to seal a deal, or silently acknowledge that neither of you were currently carrying the plague. A delicate nod or a humble bow was safer. But casual touching, heaven help you. It was seen with the same suspicion we might reserve today for someone licking all the doorknobs at a birthday party. Oh, and should you happen to sneeze during a conversation and survive without someone throwing sage at you, the polite response was not, "Bless you," from your peers. It was a fervent prayer that you did not in fact die shortly thereafter. In a world where every cough came with existential overtones, small talk became both an art and an act of psychological survival. So, you're navigating Tudor social grace, where words are weapons, phrases are fences, and silence might be your best accessory. You're not just trying to avoid offending a noble. You're trying not to offend literally anyone with ears. Even the chickens might be judging you, and frankly, they have better street smarts than you do here. Still, if you listen more than you speak, bow more than you boast, and greet the day with all the ceremony of a well-trained shrew, you might just pass as a very quiet minor cousin of someone unimportant, which, in Tudor England, is the sweet spot between safety and total obscurity. Now, having survived a few conversations and narrowly escaped linguistic embarrassment, our weary traveller might be ready to try something even more absurd, eating with company. But therein lies another tale, where cutlery is questionable and stew can occasionally glare back. Let's glide there gently, shall we? By the time dawn settles, her pale, scratchy light over the thatched rooftops of Tudor England, your fate, dear time traveller, has already begun to fray like an overwashed doublet. For let's say you somehow survived your first night, dodging the chamber pot windows, suspicious eels, and food indistinguishable from roofing tar. Congratulations. Now, there's just the small matter of social customs, specifically how not to get yourself arrested, flogged, or gently prodded into a stock session simply for opening your mouth. First, a gentle whisper about greetings in Tudor times. You cannot walk into a room and cheerily belt out a "Hey guys" or "Sup." That's not going to go over well. In fact, it might be mistaken for glossolalia and earn you a cautious blessing or a quick ducking in the horse trough, just in case of witchcraft. Instead, one greets their betters with a little bow, avoiding direct eye contact lest you be mistaken for a challenger to their social rank. Yes, eye contact was dangerous, unless you were tilting a lance in a joust or arguing over the sincerity of someone's piety. And don't forget to call people your worship, goodman, or mistress, depending on their status and gender. It's complicated, yes, but think of it like Elizabethan LinkedIn. You always endorse someone's dignity before asking where the toilet is. And speaking of toilets, still a rather squelchy issue. We come now to the subject of modesty. Remember, this is an era before deodorant and privacy, where the privy was shared, and you were lucky if it didn't double as the kitchen pantry. But paradoxically, public behaviour was tightly stitched with the thread of propriety. A lady with her hair unbound in public might as well tattoo "I consort with devils" on her forehead. A man whistling in the street. Suspicious, and possibly French. Gestures were equally fraught. Holding your hat after removing it was polite. Not holding it was impolite, Fiddling with it too much was seen as a sign of lies or nervous digestion. And heaven forbid you curse or make jest in the wrong company. Swear by the lady in a Puritan neighbourhood, and you might find yourself reported to the church wardens, a Tudor blend of neighbourhood watch and eternal damnation hotline. But the most dangerous faux pas of all, truly the bear trap beneath the ferns, was the matter of class-based clothing. You see, dear sleeper in modern pyjamas, Tudor England had sumptuary laws. These were laws that dictated what you could wear based entirely on your social status. A merchant, no silks. A fisherman, no velvet. You, with your synthetic blend hoodie and inexplicable Nike swoosh, would be breaking 14 statutes just standing in the road. It was treason, for example, to dress above your station. Literal treason. You could be fined, imprisoned, or, for stubborn offenders, enjoy a fashion show trial before the local magistrate. So sneaking into the period wearing a limited edition Tudor TikTok hoodie with glow-in-the-dark cuffs would not end well. You'd be examined, sniffed, and declared sorceress, then burned, or more likely, gossiped about into madness. Court behaviour was another minefield. Let's say you're summoned to visit a noble household. Good for you. Also terrifying. Never take the first seat unless told. Do not raise your cup before the host. And be very careful about laughing. Laughter was classed into acceptable tiers. Chuckles were fine. Guffaws were dangerously close to peasant territory. And whatever you do not speak ill of the monarch. That's not just poor manners. It's actually a legal invitation to be drawn and quartered. Even a light-hearted comment like, "Queen Liz sure likes pearls," could earn you a surprise dungeon vacation. One footnote of British law at the time actually allowed for execution based solely on the imagination of the monarch's death. So keep your Shakespearean fan fiction to yourself. So here you are, dressed wrongly, bowing at a tree, offsetting suspicion with a confusing grin, and trying desperately not to betray that your dental routine involves fluoridated toothpaste and not a parsley twig. The social code of Tudor England wraps around your ankles like an embroidered trap, a lace-laden net for the unwary. Still, you squint at the rising sun, hoping that at least the workday might bring some clarity. After all, there's nothing like simple, honest Tudor labour to distract from social peril, right? About that, let's lower our lantern now and drift toward the clang and clamour of a world where your job may be making candles. By boiling animal fat, if you found yourself standing in the middle of a Tudor town square, say, somewhere with cobbled streets, a mysterious mist wafting over a livestock market, and at least 3 men named Thomas arguing over ale, you might notice something peculiar. Not just the suspiciously barefoot pigs or the persistent smell of boiled cabbage, but rather the complete and utter absence of privacy at all levels. Let's begin with your personal hygiene, or what little you're clinging to by this point. You'd think perhaps that ducking into a privy, or what loosely qualifies as a toilet, might offer you a small sanctuary. Alas, this is Tudor England, where privacy is mythic and aromas are legendary. The privy is essentially a wooden bench with a hole perched over a pit of doom. No lock, no real door, and certainly no air freshener. It was common for entire families, or even the staff of a grand manor, to share one. And by share, I don't mean in harmonious shifts. I mean people hovering impatiently outside, openly discussing your digestive schedule. Now, if your natural instincts push you toward finding a public bathhouse, you're in for another rude awakening. By the mid-16th century, bathhouses had largely vanished, and not because Tudor people suddenly discovered the joys of soap and solitude. No, the blame lay squarely on Henry VIII's fear of plague and syphilis. Bathhouses were seen as breeding grounds for both venereal disease and gossip. So the logical solution? Ban them. Entirely. So where, you might ask, does one wash in privacy? The answer, dear listener, is that one does not. Most people washed parts, not bodies. A quick dab of the face with a cloth, a faint splash to the hands. Feet, maybe, on Sundays. Full-body immersions were for the unhinged or the French. The nobility had the luxury of bathing in wooden tubs dragged up to their chambers. But even those were social events, with attendants flitting about and jugs of warm water being poured by people with titles like Yeoman of the Bath. Everyone trying not to make eye contact, while the Lord fished a clove out of the bath water and muttered something about gout. And while it's easy to feel smug now, lounging in your modern shower with water that doesn't try to kill you, Tudor folk genuinely thought too much bathing made you weak, vulnerable to disease. Washing your skin too often will open the pores, medical texts proclaimed, and let the bad humours in. Yes, it wasn't the reeking garbage in the streets or the open sewers that concerned them. It was pores. Open pores were the horror story of their day. But let's say you're determined. You decide to buck the trend and take a good, honest scrub. You sneak to the river before dawn, perhaps hoping for a few moments of silence. Depending on where you are, that river is likely also the town's bin, latrine, and horse-washing station. Congratulations. You are now marginally wetter and significantly filthier. Of course, the privacy problem extended well beyond bodily functions. Homes weren't exactly havens of solitude either. If your host graciously lent you a room, you'd probably be sharing that space with 6 others. Good luck pretending you're asleep while they argue over whether to kill the hen tonight or save it for Sunday. Even the king, yes, the most powerful man in the realm, was subjected to elaborate rituals of exposed vulnerability. Each morning, he was attended by his groom of the stool, a real and terrifyingly trusted job involving royal bowel movements, linen cloths, and an unspoken code of honor stronger than any oaths at court. Imagine being Henry VIII, bloated with lamb and existential dread, sitting on what can only be described as a very expensive wooden chair with a chamber pot underneath it, while a man bowed solemnly and waited. That was his morning, daily. It's curious, isn't it? In an age of towering wigs, restrictive corsets, and etiquette manuals longer than some novels, the concept of just being alone wasn't widely embraced. Privacy was a luxury only truly afforded by death. Behind closed coffin lids, finally, you could keep your thoughts to yourself. And yet, there was comfort in the cacophony. Life was communal. Bits of your day brushed against everyone else's. Secrets were rare. Silence was suspicious. And modesty, well, modesty must not have smelled very strong. So if you find yourself drifting off now, safe behind locked doors, body scrubbed and tucked into fresh sheets, take a moment to be grateful. Someone in Tudor England might have killed for a scented candle and 10 uninterrupted minutes in a hot bath. Speaking of, let's gently wander into the shadowy halls of Tudor fashion, where danger comes stitched, starched, and suspiciously flammable. If you somehow made it through the flea-infested straw mattresses, bone-chilling privies, and narrow alleyways of Tudor England without immediately losing all hope, first of all, congratulations. You've exceeded all expectations, but don't get too comfortable. Because now, it's time to eat. And that, dear time-traveling traveller, is where your optimism is finally chopped, boiled, and served cold. Let's gently spoon you into the warm bowl of Tudor cuisine, or as we might more accurately call it, food-shaped confusion. You sit at the table. Well, not quite a table for you personally. More like if you were a commoner, a reused plank propped over barrels, inside a smoky, dark room that smells faintly of damp shoes and barley. The daylight outside is long gone, and the only flickering light dances from a tallow candle that smells a bit like someone overcooked a sheep, miserably. Before you can say, "Where's the menu?" someone slaps a trencher in front of you. Not a server, not a waiter. They don't exist yet. Just Margaret, who does all the work and cannot be bothered. She mumbles something in Middle English, or maybe that's just very thick rural boredom, and you gaze down. The trencher. Ah yes, the Tudor equivalent of a paper plate, except it's made of stale bread. And no, it's not edible, at least not by humans who cherish their teeth. It's several days old, hardened, and used to catch meat juices. A bread sponge. You're not sure which side is up, or if it matters. It's fine. No one actually eats it. Well, except the poor who get it passed down after everyone has poked at it enough. Or the dogs. It's unclear who wins that contest. Soon, someone ladles a greyish stew into your trencher bowl. It's called pottage, and it will be your breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And perhaps the topic of your memoir should you survive long enough. Pottage is everything and nothing. It's the kitchen sink of medieval cuisine. Oats, barley, onions, maybe some herbs if the kitchen mistress is feeling rebellious, a bit of beef, a turnip, half a pigeon, unidentified lumps. Sure, why not? The trick is, it's never quite the same, and it never quite tastes like food. You feel as though you're drinking history through a soggy crust. If you're lucky, perhaps a slice of pie shows up. Ah, Tudor pie, wrapped in a curious crust known as the coffin. No, really, they called it that. Delectable words for delicious times. The crust was often inedible, a rock-hard pastry shell meant to insulate the meat inside, not to be eaten. But the fillings, well, here, you begin to suspect that the Tudor notion of meat is far more ambitious than yours. Let's talk about the meat, because in Tudor England, if it walked, fluttered, crawled, or oinked, someone was trying to wrap it in bacon and serve it at the next feast. Blackbirds in pies, hedgehogs boiled for festivals, and swans, yes, actual swans. For the wealthy, eating majestic waterfowl was a power move. For you, maybe if one falls into your pottage by accident. Don't even get me started on spices. In a bizarre twist of logic, the spice rack in 1532 was better stocked than your mother's postmodern pantry. Cloves, cinnamon, mace, nutmeg. It read like a medieval Christmas cake from another dimension. But Tudors didn't use spice to enhance flavor. No, they used it to dominate flavor. A Tudor pie might be so spiced, it could actually kill the flavor of the badger beneath. Which was thankfully the point. As you adjust to this culinary landscape, your own stomach might rebel like a small peasant revolt of its own. You may soon long for something simple. Water, perhaps. Well now, let's talk about water. Drink it. Are you mad? Unless you've got a dog stomach and saintly luck. Water will deliver you to your ancestors remarkably swiftly. In Tudor times, water was like a dice roll with cholera. So what does everyone drink instead? Ale. All day, every day. Pale, weak, lightly alcoholic, and safer than the well. Ale was even served to children. At breakfast, in mugs, without guilt. Your 10-year-old self would be amazed, and possibly tipsy. As you try to finish your pottage, a rooster outside crows, recently confused because it too has sworn off the local drinking water. The fire crackles, the candle sinks low into its stub of tallow. Someone to your left gnaws enthusiastically on something resembling a squirrel thigh. You decide, maybe you're done eating for now. And just as you lean back, trying not to pass out from salt intake, you remember there's one more ordeal before you sleep. The Tudor toilet. But that, unfortunately, is where we're going next. Picture this. Dawn breaks across a muddy street in Tudor London. A cock crows on a rooftop, more opinionated than accurate, since it's only 4:45 a.m. Slowly, the city begins to creep awake. Chimneys exhale little puffs of smoke. Carts creak open their wooden jaws. And somewhere nearby, a bell tolls with all the pep of a hungover monk. You, dear listener, are housed in a rented corner of a creaky timber frame building that leans perilously toward the street, as though drunk on centuries. Beneath the thatched roof, you stir from your lice-infested straw pallet, your single wool blanket clinging to you like a tired excuse. Your window, if one can call a hole covered in animal bladder a window, lets in the soft grey light of a London morning. It also lets in the delightful aromas of fish, fire smoke, and nearby chamber pots. Yes, chamber pots. Because in Tudor England, indoor plumbing was as real as unicorns, believed in by a few optimistic individuals, but violently betrayed by reality. Outside, a boy with a wheelbarrow of waste is advertising his services like a street food vendor, except he's not selling anything you'd want near your face. With a sing-song yell of "Gardez l'eau," French for "watch out for the water," though in practice it meant "duck, there's pee incoming." He tosses yesterday's personal refuse into the street. A good reason to walk close to buildings and carry a very wide hat. Breakfast, if you're lucky, is already boiling in a pot over the hearth. Pottage. It is not glamorous. Imagine someone tried to reinvent soup, but purposely left out the flavour. It's a sleepy stew of grains, cabbage, onions, and possibly last night's regret. If you're better off financially, there might even be a few shreds of salted meat in it. If not, well, let's hope you like onions. Every day. Speaking of food, you might be dreaming wistfully of fresh fruit, perhaps a plump strawberry or a crisp apple. Unfortunately, unless it's summer, fruit is a memory. Tudor England had not yet discovered refrigeration, and daily vitamin intake relied heavily on luck. Scurvy was not just for sailors, you see. It was for basically everyone with bad timing. Now, let's say you've somehow brushed your teeth. Congratulations. You've used a twig, no paste, unless you've got access to some salt and soot with a hint of mint. The preferred hygiene technique involves a cheerful scrub with a cloth and murmured prayers that your breath doesn't knock out the village midwife. You splash a bit of water on your face, a chilly splash that may bring tears, and you're ready to face the day, as soon as you've pulled on your stockings and woolen kirtle or doublet. Fashion, while dashing in paintings, was an entirely different beast when worn daily. Bodices were laced tight enough to require engineering degrees, and men's hose were more revealing than most Renaissance art. Leather shoes squeaked with every step, unless they were caked in last week's journey through cowfields and medieval slush. As you step outside, you're hit with a waft of smoke from the neighbour's fire, and a street seller immediately tries to offload oysters on you. London's cheapest, most suspicious protein. Oysters were for the poor, which says something bleak about seafood hygiene in the 1500s. "Half a dozen for a penny, love," she says, waving a bucket that may or may not contain a shellfish still twitching in protest. The noises rise like a gentle avalanche. Hoofbeats from a horse clomping past, the clang of a blacksmith's hammer, a baker shouting his wares. The baker's wares, by the way, are surprisingly meagre. Thanks to every monarch's passionate love affair with price fixing and grain taxes, bread is both bland and politically complicated. Certain sumptuary laws also forbade you, a non-noble peasant, from buying the fancy mansion bread, even if you could afford it. Everyone got a slice of classism for breakfast, and as you begin whatever your trade may be, apprentice scrivener, soap boiler, or someone whose job title sounds like a euphemism, you find yourself wondering about things like weekends, not a thing, labour rights, wouldn't that be lovely, and social mobility, also not a thing. Your world is contained to the city, or the street, or possibly the single narrow alley where 4 siblings share one pair of shoes. It would be enough to drive anyone mad, but you carry on. This is the rhythm of the Tudor day, full of work, soot, and startlingly low standards for sanitation. With your belly partially full of pottage and your shoes already wet at the toes, you set out into the bustle toward a job that's probably underpaid, overworked, and regularly interrupted by mysterious deaths. But don't worry. As you wind through the streets with your eyes to the ground and your ears tuned to the gossip of the baker's daughter, something very curious is about to unfold in the churchyard. Something involving a goose, a poet, and 3 cases of mistaken identity. Yes, we're almost there. A gentle rain has begun to fall over the thatched rooftops of Tudor England, tapping out a sleepy lullaby on the wooden beams and mossy tiles. It's the sort of drizzle that smells like damp wool and chimney smoke, and while you might dream of curling up with a good book and a biscuit, the Tudors would strongly encourage you to get back to work, or praying, or shoveling something unpleasant. Yet, of all the challenges awaiting your modern sensibilities in the 1500s, few are as dangerously underestimated as the food. Yes, dinner, which ought to be your safe place, especially after a chaotic day of surviving lice, avoiding plague carts, misusing chamber pots, and blowing your cover as a supposedly God-fearing Protestant, is now yet another minefield. Let's say you're trying to be polite. You've accepted a wooden trencher of humble offerings from your host. You take a small bite. It is grey. In taste, in texture, in ambition, grey. You suppress the instinct to ask, is this supposed to be warm? Or, what animal was this again? Questions like these might make you sound French, or worse, educated. Our Tudor diet is determined by deeply confusing ideas from Galenic medicine, which classified food into qualities like hot, cold, wet, and dry. Pigeon was considered hot and moist, lettuce, cold and moist, bread, thank heaven, neutral. You, dear snoozer, would fail horribly at this dinner party. You'd likely ask for a menu. Instead, the Tudors balanced their bodies through food, like an alchemist with access to beef pies. The terrifying truth is that rich people were eating things that would send your modern stomach into witness protection. Jellied eels, roasted swan, porpoise stew, not because they liked them, but because it proved they could afford servants to kill something exotic and boil it into submission. Now, you might sneakily reach for a vegetable, perhaps a carrot or a humble green bean. Alas, scandal. Vegetables grew in dirt, and that meant they were for poor people. Underground food was suspicious, damp, common. They even loosely connected root vegetables with flatulence and melancholy, which, to be fair, sometimes do travel in pairs. Fruits weren't safe either. Fresh fruit was often shunned in its raw state, far too risky. You might say, I'll just have this lovely apple from the tree. And a Tudor would respond, no one sane eats a raw apple. Have you tried boiling it 3 times and stuffing it with minced mutton and raisins instead? Even water, the purest, simplest thing your eyelids might dream of, was viewed with a great deal of fear. Tudor water was often served cloudy, occasionally enthusiastic with algae, and always suspicious. So many turned to ale or weak beer, practically from infancy. You, thinking you're hydrating, are instead mildly tipsy by lunch. Congratulations. You're now one of the happiest peasants in the village, and you still haven't had a glass of actual water. And then, if you are lucky or unlucky enough to dine in a noble household, there awaits the most baffling moment of all, the sugar feast. Sugar, glorious sugar, imported at ruinous expense, was powdered over meats, packed into sculptures, moulded into sugary hedgehogs, towers, and somehow even battleships. Glazed teeth shimmering in candlelight, the nobles would consume desserts that defied logic and dental hygiene. If you're thinking, that can't be healthy, you'd be correct. Their teeth were, by and large, disasters. Queen Elizabeth the Pfeffer herself was reportedly fond of sugar candies and avoided smiling in later life for reasons we can all empathize with. You, brave time traveler with modern molars and quinoa-based expectations, would stare in horror at the spread, a crusty roast garnished with geraniums, a bowl of peas sweetened with honey, a pie containing birds, live ones sometimes. To be sixpence in your pocket honest, you'd be better off skipping dinner entirely and discreetly eating the bread trencher your food was served on. And oh yes, we've not even addressed manners. Forks were practically mythical, introduced during the Tudor era, but still viewed with suspicion, as if using a tiny pitchfork branded you as a sorcerer or worse. Italian. Most folks just gnawed on things directly, or used their daggers as a sort of murderous cutlery. If you go reaching for your salad fork at this table, expect puzzled looks and possibly questions from the church. So tonight, as you lie snoozing between your imaginary Tudor hay-stuffed mattress and a chamber pot of unspoken horror, know that you would absolutely, irrefutably, and deliciously be doomed come dinner time. But worry not, there are other dangers still to come. Tomorrow brings the thrilling joy of Tudor justice, and why you'd best not steal a loaf of bread unless you've also stolen a very convincing fake beard. By now, you've ducked the plague, sidestepped the wrath of Henry VIII, and survived the traumatic haircut known as a hood. But if you thought you were done dodging disaster in Tudor England, let's turn your attention to something both deceptively simple and terrifyingly scarce. Good old-fashioned food. Or, more precisely, anything edible that wouldn't commit mutiny in your stomach by midnight. The day begins, as most days for the average Tudor commoner, with a modest breakfast. Except, breakfast is a generous word. You'd be fortunate to suck on a crust of yesterday's rye bread with the texture of roof tile. The Tudor lower classes weren't exactly sipping oat milk lattes with ethically sourced cinnamon. No, instead, you might gulp down weak ale. Yes, even for breakfast, because the water usually doubled as a bacterial roulette wheel. Speaking of ale, calm your modern sensibilities. Ale in Tudor times wasn't the hearty pint you'd find in a cosy pub today. It was more of a lukewarm barley tea brewed by someone's gran in a questionable bucket. Still, it was safer than the Thames, which at the time resembled more of a collective sewage memory than a river. By midday, your stomach might politely inquire when actual food would arrive. Welcome to dinner, the noon meal and the heaviest of the day. If you're a peasant, and statistically you are, your feast consists of pottage. Think of pottage like a medieval smoothie for the soul. except much less smooth and infinitely more lumpy. It was a sort of stew made by throwing everything edible, almost edible, or possibly edible into a large communal pot and simmering it until not even the individual vegetables remembered who they'd once been. Cabbage, leeks, onions, maybe a turnip that had seen better seasons, all boiled into a comforting, flavourless soup. Meat was a luxury. If your village butcher had a pig go rogue and break its leg, congratulations, it's pork night. Otherwise, your protein might come from beans, lentils, or the occasional weevil you didn't catch in your grain. Now, if you belonged to the aristocracy, your plate told an entirely different story. The Tudors loved their meat. Swans, peacocks, and porpoises graced the tables of the noble class, often decorated to look alive again. In fact, they sometimes roasted a bird, then redressed it in its own feathers for dramatic effect, because nothing says bon appétit like being stared down by your entree mid-mastication. Spices were wildly expensive, so the wealthy used them as edible status symbols. Even sugar, which had only just begun to sweet-talk England, was considered a spice. They'd sculpt elaborate sugar statues, castles, and even miniature churches just to impress their equally overdressed dinner guests. The irony? Their dental hygiene was roughly on par with an old pirate ship. A mouthful of blackened stumps, yet they'd smile proudly over their marzipan monasteries. You, humble time traveller, would likely not be at these banquets, unless you were serving at one. And even then, the rules around leftovers were strict. The rich did engage in a form of food charity called almsgiving, where scraps were distributed to the needy. But not before the dogs had their turn. Tudor hierarchy was firm. Nobleman, nobleman's dog, you. And we haven't even discussed fasting days. Oh yes, the church had opinions about your caloric intake. There were over 150 days each year when meat was forbidden. Fish became king. Though the types available were often so dried, salted, or pickled, they'd come back to life solely to protest. In coastal towns, fresh fish was a rare blessing. Inland, good luck. River eels were popular, though not necessarily by choice. Imagine something that looks like a slippery spell from a low-budget horror film grilled over a smoky hearth. Still, better than fasting on boiled grass, which was an actual practice among particularly devout or particularly unlucky souls. Surviving Tudor dining wasn't about satisfaction, it was about endurance. The aroma of charcoal and damp herbs lingering in your tunic, the community pot bubbling with yesterday's guesswork, somehow it knitted people together. Or maybe they were just too weak from hunger to fight. So tonight, as you lie snug under your modern duvet with snacking privileges aplenty, admire the miracle of your refrigerator and give silent thanks you're not discussing the merits of swanbeak texture while chewing on your 12th spoonful of bean-flavoured sorrow stew. Now, settle in, and let's meander gently towards something sweeter. Not sugar sculptures, no. We're heading into the slippery world of Tudor hygiene next. And trust me, your toothbrush will thank you. You've made it through the town square, endured the unspeakable horror that was your first Tudor breakfast, and somehow survived a very confusing conversation with your host, who may or may not have mistaken you for a foreign envoy due to your mysteriously modern accent. But now, your next trial awaits, and it's not a bear-baiting pit or the inexplicable need for cod pieces. No, my dear out-of-place time traveller, it's money, or rather, the dizzying chaos that was Tudor currency. You reach into your pocket, perhaps automatically tapping where your debit card usually waits, and instead retrieve nothing. Because in 1532, Apple Pay is just a man throwing fruit at a merchant and running. Now, in this clink and clatter world of shillings and groats, trying to pay for a sip of ale or a bowl of thin pottage quickly turns into a comical little drama. Let's explore, shall we? Tudor England didn't exactly have a crisp and clean system of denominations. Instead, it was a charming mathematical headache. Picture this. 12 pence made a shilling. 20 shillings made a pound. So far, so Victorian sounding. But, oh no, let's go deeper. There were groats, worth 4 pence, and half groats, of course. Farthings, which were a quarter penny, and half pennies as well. You'd think the system had been designed by someone who loved fractions more than people. This monetary scavenger hunt was made worse by the fact that coins were often clipped, literally snipped at the edges, by unscrupulous folk trying to steal the silver bit by bit. It's why the edges of modern coins are ridged, by the way, to stop exactly that kind of medieval tomfoolery. Then there's the thrilling instability of the whole coinage economy. You see, King Henry V, he of the 6 wives and large turkey legs, decided he rather fancied some French wars, big palaces, and an intimate chat with the Pope about annulment. All quite costly. So what's an extravagant monarch to do? He began a cheeky little trick called debasing the coinage. That meant slowly reducing the amount of actual silver in the coins while keeping their face value the same. The coins looked more or less the same, but they were worth significantly less. Sort of like paying for your groceries today with chocolate coins, but insisting they're gold doubloons. By the time Henry was through, the once proud silver penny looked more green than noble and had all the purchasing power of a wet biscuit. Inflation went up, bread prices soared, and your travel pouch of shiny coinage from earlier. It's now about as useful as buttons at the apothecary. Bartering becomes your next best option. You offer up your watch, something that the innkeeper stares at like a wizard's talisman. Its ticking unnerves him. You try to explain digital timekeeping, but all he hears is tiny lightning trap. You are politely asked to take your sorcery outside. And speaking of shops, Tudor commerce wasn't run by big box stores or credit lines. Local markets were the bustling heart of economics. The fishmonger has fresh eels, recalling a time when gelatinous, slippery proteins were thought to be the height of culinary refinement. The cloth seller argues loudly with a woman over the price of dyed wool, while a cheese dealer discreetly scratches his armpit with a wheel of Stilton. Even if you had exact change, which, let's be honest, you do not, you'd still need to understand local units of measure. Tudor England delightfully resisted anything resembling standardization. A stone might weigh 14 pounds, or not. A gallon in London might not be a gallon in York. Buying grain could be based on the size of the merchant's hat on a Tuesday. After several confusing attempts to barter your shoelaces, offer an IOU, and mime the concept of a contactless transaction, you retreat wearily to the town green. You sit beside a goose who's being surprisingly judgmental, and that's when it hits you. In Tudor England, surviving a single day isn't really about knowing the history or speaking the right way. It's about participating in a chaotic, hand-to-hand improvisation where money isn't just confusing, it's practically abstract art. But don't start panicking yet, because as the moon rises over the half-timbered roofs and you hear the mellow tune of a minstrel playing something vaguely catchy yet suspiciously off-key, your attention turns to a nearby gathering crowd. A street performance is about to begin. Jugglers, jesters, and something called a performing alchemist. Ah yes, entertainment, Tudor style. If you thought Tudor money was complicated, just wait until someone tries to turn lead into gold, for real. There's something particularly unnerving about public hygiene. when the phrase shared toothpick was once considered a community amenity. Imagine, if you will, standing in a Tudor alley, ankle deep in mysterious puddles, squinting at someone's smile, and realizing you've just made prolonged eye contact with a wooden pick that's seen more mouths than a town crier. Welcome to London, 1549-ish. Population growing. Sanitation optional. Today, we descend gently into the fragrant problem that quite literally filled the streets. Tudor waste management, or the conspicuous lack thereof. Picture nighttime in Tudor London. The stars sparkle dimly above, the Thames murmurs lazily, and from a window overhead, someone yells a cheery "Gardez l'eau." That's your cue to leap sideways, fast. Moments later, a sloshing thud hits the cobblestones where you were just standing. It's not soup, my dear listener. It's last night's chamber pot contents, now formally confined and newly airborne. Gardez l'eau was a helpful little French phrase meaning, watch out for the water. It didn't help. It mostly confirmed your suspicions too late. You see, toilets, as we understand them, had not received their official invitation to history yet. Most people relieved themselves into chamber pots indoors, which were then emptied, sometimes responsibly, often creatively, into the streets, gutters and rivers. Now, if you're wondering whether carrying your own scented handkerchief around your nose like a dainty noble might help, absolutely. Several Tudors did just that, tucking a sweet-smelling nosegay under their noses to combat the bouquet of cow dung, fish guts, and human enthusiasm. But let's delve into the infrastructure. The Tudor solution to street waste was, charitably, inconsistent. Some wealthier areas had muck collectors who'd shuffle along with carts and shovels, scraping whatever the city flung at them. These unsung heroes were well acquainted with the character of every back alley and had calves, like small deities, from wading through waist-deep woes. They were sometimes compensated, though never, ever enough. In an effort to contain the chaos, certain mayors tried to enforce rules. King Henry VIII himself once ordered that waste should not be thrown into the street before 10 p.m. Think of it as Tudor England's earliest attempt at time-restricted garbage collection, only with a much higher likelihood of ruining your shoes. But what of the rivers, you ask? Surely the Thames served as a natural sewage system. Oh dear dreamer, yes. Tragically it did. The Thames bore the burdens of 1,000 chamber pots by breakfast. It was London's lifeline and, sadly, its largest commode. People still bathed in it, washed their clothes in it, sometimes even drank from it, although those people tended not to make it to the next season. Though the stink could curl your eyelashes, manfully they persisted. After all, the nose is an adaptable creature. Much like teenagers surviving on hot Cheetos and irony, the Tudor nose developed the ability to ignore what it couldn't process. Foreign diplomats visiting England often wrote home detailing the eye-watering stenches, comparing London favourably to bogs, cesspools, and, in one memorable case, a city built in the drainpipe of heaven. Let us now drift toward the domestic quarters, the noble's manor. Surely things were cleaner there. Alas, no. While they may have possessed more elegant chamber pots, some even painted with charming faces or Latin mottos, the fate of their contents was quite the same. Tossed, flung, left, ignored. Even the royal court had to contend with an occasional miasmatic episode. There are recorded moments when entire gatherings had to be moved due to, let's call it, an olfactory emergency. And if you believe that being assigned the king's groom of the stool, the royal servant in charge of assisting His Majesty with movements most personal, meant cushy court life, Well, technically yes. The role actually came with considerable power, but that's a tale best reserved for another moonlit moment. Here, lying in your warm bed, breathing clean 21st century air, you may begin to appreciate just how truly victorious your nostrils are. As candles in shuttered Tudor windows gutter against the night, and the streets glisten with nocturnal offerings, let's close today's little walk down olfactory memory lane. Tomorrow, perhaps, we'll wander into sound, another Tudor sense that earned its scars, especially once bagpipes entered the room. As evening mist snakes through the cobbled alleys of Tudor London, let's step away from the peasants' muck-riddled boots and turn our quiet gaze towards something a smidge more glamorous: Tudor fashion. A term here that means excessive suffering in the name of looking vaguely presentable. If you thought modern skinny jeans were a test of flexibility and perseverance, wait until you hear about codpieces and ruffs. Let's begin with the codpiece. That inexplicable protuberance sewn onto the front of men's trousers wasn't just for aesthetic bravado. It was actually, believe it or not, functional. Men's hose, or tight-fitting leggings, were often split at the crotch, which led to the necessity of something. And so, the codpiece was born. At first, it was a modest triangle of cloth, but because we are humans and nothing can remain sensible for long, it evolved over time into an increasingly padded, embroidered, and alarmingly pointed display of masculine pride. Think of it as a mix between a fashion statement, a drawer for your coin purse, and a soft tissue injury waiting to happen. If you're imagining it as impractical and awkward, excellent. You're picturing it correctly. Now for the women, gowns, layers upon sweltering layers of them. A noblewoman in Tudor times essentially dressed like a travelling tent made of damask silk and passive internal panic. First came the smock, your basic undergarment, and then petticoats, then stays, those dreamy precursors to corsets, then a farthingale, which was a stiffened hoop skirt contraption that made sure your hips had the approximate width of a Tudor pantry. The farthingale, mind you, was not just fashion. Oh no, it was function too. Its springy circumference helped maintain personal space at elite gatherings, like a wearable velvet fence. It looked elegant, yes, but it also made sitting down an interpretive dance between geometry and trust in stool legs. And the pièce de résistance, the ruff. This frilly, cartwheel-sized collar of pleated linen announced to the world, I have no peripheral vision, and I'm just fine with that. Stiffened with starch and fastened with pins, lots and lots of pins, the ruff could be so large that wearers needed little silver or wooden sticks, called pickadills, to prop them up, because even necks have limits, and the ruff had none. Maintaining one was an art form. Bleachers and laundresses spent hours boiling, starching, drying, and setting each individual pleat using built tools called poking sticks. Think of tiny medieval curling irons, but more flammable. A well-creased ruff might have been the height of sophistication, but one wrong move, like sneezing or turning your head, and you'd crumple your social status right along with your linen. Hair, of course, had its own chapter in this overlayered theatre. Elizabethan women plucked their hairlines to create the illusion of a higher forehead, long foreheads being considered piously attractive for reasons lost to time and probably best left there. Blonde hair was all the rage, aided by concoctions involving everything from alum to urine. Yes, urine. A fashion tip for the ages. If it stinks, it probably signals nobility. Men, not wishing to be outdone, dabbled in beard sculpting to such an extent that barbers advertised specific beard shapes: the spade, the stiletto, the sugar loaf. if you couldn't grow one? Easy, buy one. Fake beards could be glued on and were occasionally made from someone else's hair. Whose? Best not to ask at that price point. Now imagine yourself trying to sleep in any of this. Your ruff removed, your girdle unlaced, perhaps. Perhaps you can finally recline. But no, you forgot the lacing points connecting your doublet to your hose. Try undressing with tiny finger hooks under candlelight while your sleeping mat is straw and your chamber pot eyes you ominously from the corner. And yet, in all this corseted codpiece splendor, fashion served its main purpose with flying and occasionally flaming colors, to say, I have money, servants, and a complete disregard for bone comfort. Now, let's gently loosen our metaphorical ruff and tiptoe into the quieter corners of the Tudor mind. Because while fashion may have been tight, their dreams were rather spacious. As moonlight glints softly off your imaginary woolen cap, let's step delicately into the aching feet of a Tudor traveller, someone who, one might assume, would venture to take a well-earned break at a charming roadside inn. A fire-crackling hearthside, a foamy mug of ale passed into one tired hand, and a straw mattress waiting upstairs. But here's the wrinkle. If you walked into your average 16th century coaching inn expecting R&R, you might instead find questionable pottage, a bed filled with strangers, and a lice situation so advanced it might require its own heraldry. Most inns were cramped, lively, and fragrant in ways that could only be described as deeply unhelpful. The fire in the hearth, yes, delightful, but also the only place in the establishment devoid of damp socks. You'd be shoulder to shoulder with drovers, tinkers, and one possible herbalist who insists nettles cure headaches, heartbreaks, and, somewhat controversially, plague. Let's take a stroll inside, shall we? The timber beams above your head sag just slightly under the weight of centuries of smoke and storytelling. The innkeeper eyes you with a mix of boredom and suspicion, the universal welcome of anyone who's had too many travellers and too few coins paid in full. You order ale. It arrives lukewarm. The tankard, wood. The taste, somewhere between sour apple and, mysteriously, bathtub. Dining in Tudor times was equal parts necessity and gamble. The stew you're given has been cooking since what you assume is just before Christianity. It's mostly turnip, possibly rat, definitely turnip. A slip of meat thuds into your bowl with a splash. When you ask what it is, even the innkeeper replies, hopefully edible. But you eat it. It's surprisingly hot. And that's good enough. Upstairs is where the real adventure begins. Your room, or more accurately, your rented third of a mattress, is shared. Shared with two other travellers and their collective regrets. Beds were expensive, you see, so splitting one was common. That cosy four-poster you dreamt of. Think again. It's straw. Sometimes feathers, though that didn't always mean birds. One man snores, the other talks in his sleep about wool prices, and you begin to wonder if sleeping under an ox cart outdoors might have been the move. Then the bedbugs arrive. They belong to the mattress in the way a ghost haunts a house. It was theirs first, and they are not gracious hosts. Sitting bolt upright in the dark, slapping yourself like an interpretive dancer mid-performance, you accept that you won't be resting so much as making high-stakes negotiations with nature's tiniest vampires. The Tudor Inn at night is no less busy than it is by day. The floors creak with footsteps, the goats in the stable bleat unsettlingly close, and someone starts playing an inexplicable flute at what must be 2 a.m. Is it local custom? Some kind of nocturnal ritual? No one knows. Tudor England didn't have noise complaints. It had ale, Personal hygiene contributes significantly to the overall ambience. You, of course, are no better off. Having not bathed in days, and beginning to suspect the pottage wasn't as hypothetical rat-free as hoped. But even if you did want to bathe, that would require a conveniently placed bathhouse, hot water, and probably magic. So instead, you and your temporary bedfellows all marinate gently together, like a slow-cooked stew of humanity, woven into the very fabric of Tudor domesticity. Entertainment in such places range from richly humorous singing to deeply confusing storytelling. One man in the corner claims to have seen a three-headed goose. Another swears by a cure that involves standing on one leg and reciting the Lord's Prayer backward. You're not quite sure whether you're laughing from amusement or hysteria, but either way, it's something. Eventually, the inn quiets. The fire dies down to embers and reluctant shadows, casting flickering tails upon the walls. You lay back amongst the straw, the snoring, the itching, and the slowly cooling air. You sigh. You think of your memory foam pillow back in the 21st century and feel genuine longing, but also a kind of dreaminess too. There's something oddly cozy about it all. The imperfect, awkward closeness, the communal misery masquerading as comfort. Outside, a distant rooster decides to test its vocals hours before dawn. Inside, someone murmurs in Latin for reasons we'll never know. And as you drift there, half asleep, nestled between straw and stranger, you might begin to wonder how the Tudors dealt with such nights. A little firelight, a lot of fleas, and absolutely no privacy. Sleep gently now. Next, we'll peek into something Tudor fashion never had, but desperately, desperately needed. There you are, still alive. Remarkable, really, given the Tudor era's talent for accidental murder via breakfast sausage or impromptu treason charges. And let's be honest, if the food or the politics didn't get you, the healthcare almost certainly would. Because tonight, we drift softly into the wonderland of Tudor medicine. Ah, yes, medicine. The comforting illusion that you might not perish immediately. But first, a bit of context, so you can clutch your lavender-scented pillow with gratitude. In Tudor England, the field of medicine was a thrilling mashup of classical Greek theory, church doctrine, and good old-fashioned guesswork. Imagine your GP also being your butcher and your local priest, all rolled into one, with a vague understanding of astrology and a serious grudge against leeches, unless they were really in the mood for some. The medical profession was respectfully categorized into three flavors: physicians, surgeons, and barber surgeons. Physicians were the elite, university-educated in Latin, fluent in humoral theory and long-winded diagnoses. Surgeons were less snooty and more hands-on, literally, for they did the actual cutting, bone setting, and blister lancing. And then the barber surgeons. Well, they could trim your beard, pull a tooth, and remove a gangrenous toe, all before lunch. Efficiency was really the only anesthesia. But let's say you, dear time-traveling visitor, felt unwell, perhaps a bit pale and dizzy after that questionable meat pie. Your host, bless him, would call in a physician who'd examine your humours. These were not your jokes, although bad ones might have been a symptom, but the four bodily fluids thought to govern health: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. The goal in Tudor medicine was balance. Feel sluggish, too much phlegm. Angry, too much yellow bile. Melancholic just from being in the 1500s. Excess black bile naturally. But how to correct this imbalance? Well, best not to ask. Let's talk treatments. One popular remedy involved bloodletting, the noble art of opening a vein and letting nature, or at least gravity, take its course. Think of it as an early subscription service to lightheadedness. Leeches were also chic. These elegant little vampires were applied to the skin to suck out bad blood, or just whatever blood happened to be there. Herbal remedies were widespread too. Sage, rosemary, and chamomile weren't just for seasoning your mutton. They were key ingredients in the average Tudor medicine cabinet. Wormwood sounded terrifying but had its fans. And if that didn't work, powdered frogs, ground up mummy, yes, that kind, and dried fox lungs might have been offered by more adventurous practitioners. For variety. Astrology played a healthful role as well. A physician might consult the stars before examining you, in case Mercury, being in retrograde, meant your spleen was acting out again. Never underestimate the sorrowful influence of Saturn on your gallbladder. Hospitals were technically a thing, but only just. Most were religious institutions, more hospitable than medical. They'd take you in, offer you a prayer, maybe a blanket, and help you prepare for death with dignity, if not cleanliness. Surgeons operated with all the flair of a Renaissance artist and roughly the same volume of blood, but sterilization. Not even a twinkle in the barber's eye. Tools were rarely cleaned, although wiping them on one's apron seemed to do the trick. Amputation? Quite common. Anesthetics? No. You'd be given a stout swig of ale, a piece of leather to bite down on, and a sympathetic glance. The speed of the surgeon was crucial, not just for your survival, but also for reviews from the onlooking crowd. Yes, crowds. Surgery was often observed, sometimes in what can only be described as social gatherings with extra screaming. For women, medicine was an even trickier affair. Midwives were essential for childbirth, a terrifying event made riskier by poor hygiene and limited medical knowledge. Some midwives were revered, others accused of witchcraft. The line was thin and often dependent on whether the baby survived the ordeal. Still, not everything was hopeless. The Tudors were curious, endlessly so. They translated ancient texts, conducted autopsies in secret, and slowly, very slowly, began to question the centuries-old wisdom of Galen and Hippocrates. It would take another 200 years for germ theory, antibiotics, and dental floss to arrive and stop the general wailing. But for now, as the stars wheel gently overhead, and a distant owl considers your prognosis, take comfort. In this candle-lit age of leeches and leavened humours, your best treatment might simply be a warm fire, a dry blanket, and the knowledge that nothing hurts quite so much as your barber looking thoughtful with a blade. And speaking of sharp blades and thoughtful barbers, you'll want to close your eyes as we tiptoe gently from medical curiosities to the equally confounding world of Tudor fashion. Because beauty, as they knew too well, was often pain. Just when you thought you were getting the hang of Tudor England, navigating chamber pots, surviving plague, bats, and learning not to call the monarch mate, along comes something that confuses, bewilders, and ultimately defeats even the heartiest time traveller. The law. Now, Tudor law wasn't like today's. Pages and pages of fine print written by bored lawyers who secretly wished they'd become poets. No, Tudor justice was far more energetic. And by energetic, I mean chaotic, frighteningly random, and occasionally based on whether the local magistrate had skipped breakfast. Let's say you show up in 1542, and without thinking, whistle a little tune called Greensleeves outside a parish church. Someone overhears, it sounds slightly French, and boom, into the stocks with you, foreign sympathizer. Or worse, They might declare you a recusant, which is a fancy word for you're not praying the right way, punishable by increasingly imaginative fines, or, if you were especially unlucky, execution. One of the great misadventures of Tudor life was trying to figure out when saying nothing might get you executed, but saying something might get you, really, executed. It was a bit like trying to walk across a field full of rakes while blindfolded, and everyone is quietly judging you. Justice in those days loved a good public spectacle, and nothing screamed Tuesday afternoon fun, like a public hanging, or for high-profile cases, something more dramatic, drawing and quartering anyone. No, prefer something with a bit more religious flavour to it. Burnings were in vogue for the heretical crowd. Equal opportunity, really. But perhaps the most baffling part was how laws could shift overnight depending on the royal mood. Under Henry VIII, it became illegal, actually treasonous, to say you didn't like one of his 6 wives. Think about that. One minute you're frowning vaguely near a portrait of Anne of Cleves, and the next you're on trial for your eyebrows. Oh, and speaking of trials, Tudor courts did not exactly follow the innocent until proven guilty model. In truth, they preferred the "you look a bit dodgy, don't you?" approach. Most people didn't have lawyers. Your defense strategy was often, "I swear I didn't do it," followed by hoping the judge didn't have indigestion that day. Even worse, some crimes weren't even about what you did, but what you wore. The sumptuary laws dictated, often in excruciating detail, what clothing was appropriate for which class. Wearing purple silk if you weren't aristocracy? That was illegal. Yes, illegal. Heaven forbid a common person looked a tad regal. Might cause all sorts of confusion amidst the goose markets and mutton pies. Imagine trying to get dressed in the morning and needing a legal advisor just to check if your doublet buttons were the right metal. Any brass below a knight's rank. Straight to the local pillory, where villagers could throw whatever rotten vegetable was trendy that season. Turnips were very in that decade. Now, if by some cosmic luck you actually, weren't innocent, it still didn't mean you'd get off scot-free, because justice didn't just enjoy being swift. It liked to be poetic. One example is the infamous trial by ordeal, which was fading out in the Tudor era, but still lingered in cultural memory. That's where you'd plunge your hand into boiling water, and if it healed miraculously fast, you were clearly innocent. This was not, you'll be unsurprised to hear, a proven method of jurisprudence. Of course, there was always the royal pardon. If you managed to write a weepy enough letter to the monarch, and if your crime wasn't something horrifying like plotting regicide or, worse, escaping taxes, there was a slight chance you'd be spared. But considering the king also sometimes changed laws mid-meal, the odds weren't exactly on your side. Still, in a country where even not removing your hat fast enough could be seen as disrespect, thereby becoming legally actionable, and where some towns fine people simply for swearing in public, the safest legal strategy was to avoid life altogether. Perhaps curl up in the corner of a stable pretending to be hay, which, truth be told, might actually be the most legally sound idea in Tudor England. And once you're done dodging arbitrary arrests, maybe we can finally talk about that charming little Tudor habit with food, where spices and lead were liberally applied in equal measure. But that's a tale best chilled before served. Now then, imagine this. You've survived the food, the smells, the mysterious meat pies, and the ever-present worry of stepping in something historical and organic. You've even endured the fashion, woolen tights and all, with dignity mostly intact. But now it's evening in Tudor England, and your host invites you to a dinner party. You accept, of course. Declining would be unthinkable, rude, barbaric even. Little do you know, the Tudor social dinner is less cozy get-together and more like trying to do Sudoku while blindfolded and insulted in Latin. You arrive, washed and waxed to Tudor standards, which is to say, not very. You smell faintly of lavender oil over a base note of sweat and moral ambiguity. You step into a warm, flickering great hall, aglow with the golden dance of tallow candlelight, and are immediately beset by a chorus of greetings, each one subtly offering a test. Are you high enough in rank to speak first? Should you offer your hand or a bow? If you handshake the wrong baronet, you may be struck off someone's inheritance list by morning. The table is laid with an ostentatious display of what can only be described as edible architecture. A roasted peacock, still feathered and majestically reassembled for decoration, looms like a centerpiece of Baroque avian vengeance. Next to it, a glazed piglet stares at you with a blank expression, as though it is acutely aware of the irony. You're seated, not where you want, but where your social status allows. This was not a casual buffet affair. Oh no, the order of seating was an exact science, dictated by lineage, political favor, and likely the alignment of the stars. Sit too far up, and you're presumptuous. Too low, and you're quietly regarded as pudding with opinions. Servants approach. One pours water into a shared bowl. Another hands you a napkin made of fabric so stiff it could sand wood. You wash your hands, awkwardly mimicking the person beside you, who does it confidently, as if this entire ritual is just a warm-up for the main event, acquiring goose fat and secrets. Now comes the part where things get theatrical. A course is announced by trumpeters, because why not? A pie is paraded in, a glorious golden dome. A knife is plunged in, and out flies a small flock of pigeons, real ones. This is not metaphor. It was considered the height of culinary glamour to bake a surprise into your entree. The pale man to your left nods solemnly, as if to say, yes, I too enjoy dinner and chaos. You attempt eating, wary of the possibilities. The knife you've been given could probably slay a boar, but doesn't spread butter without threat of bodily harm. Every bite must be carefully negotiated. Is this fish, fowl, some kind of reconstituted Tudor protein? Best not to ask. Curiosity is how people accidentally commit treason. Above all, avoid complaining. Many dishes are merrily spiced, which is Tudor for aggressively peppered to the point of internal combustion. You smile through the uncomfortable tingle in your molars. Everyone else appears utterly nonchalant, as if their tongues have evolved calluses. Conversation swirls around you like embroidered curtains. One gentleman opines on land enclosures. Another quotes Pliny the Elder in Latin. A woman across the table mentions her husband was executed last Tuesday. She says this the way one might comment on the rain. A bother, but what can you do? You have no idea how to respond. Oh, seems oddly insufficient. Did he deserve it? Is frankly too bold. 3 hours pass. You can't feel your legs. You've drunk enough mead to mistake your reflection in the goblet for a court official, and you've been smiling so politely, your jaw may now be legally dislocated. Just as you think it's winding down, someone brings out the syllabub, Tudor dessert, equal parts dairy, sugar, and potential for gout. It's a sweet, whipped concoction above a base of wine or cider. You take a spoonful and experience something close to delirious joy. It's the first thing you've eaten all day that hasn't had a face. Eventually, the final toast is made. To the crown, to health, to God save us all from the French. You nod fervently. It feels like a safe bet. And with that, the feast concludes. You attempt to stand but realize your legs gave up around course 9. You're gently escorted out and into the night air once more, which smells wonderfully of wood smoke and peat with subtle notes of livestock. Ah, Tudor dining, where every meal is a performance and indigestion is a sign of status well earned. And somewhere in the distance, under a low-hanging moon, another spectacle awaits. The public bathhouse. If your appetite survived dinner, well, we'll see if it survives the bath. Picture this. The familiar chime of the town bell floats through a misty Tudor morning, cool fog rolling sluggishly between crooked, timbered houses. You're wrapped in a homespun cloak, wool, of course, with a texture like the bristly end of a broom. The smell of damp earth mingles with the curious odor of boiled cabbage and civic responsibility. You blink up at a weather-beaten wooden sign, swinging slowly in the wind. It appears you've stumbled upon the local courthouse. Here, in this drafty Tudor chamber of law, justice puts on tights and takes itself very seriously indeed. See, legal matters in Tudor England were less about due process and more about drama. Picture a courtroom without lawyers, where accusations carry more weight than evidence, and where an oddly shaped mole might suggest you're communing with dark forces. Witchcraft, bad harvest, missing chicken, all suspiciously interconnected. In this realm of medieval jurisprudence, you're always approximately 2 strange glances away from a very unpleasant afternoon. And in case you're wondering, no, there's not really a reliable appeals process. There is, however, trial by ordeal, which sounds romantic, but typically involves you being forced to carry a red-hot iron bar across the room, after which your ability to heal without gangrene decides your innocence. A slow healer. Guilty. Immune system on point. Welcome back to society. Tea? Now, let's say you found yourself not on trial, thank heavens, but as a lowly onlooker at one of His Majesty's public justice displays, a not uncommon form of edutainment. You and the rest of the townsfolk shuffle in, eager for a bit of spectacle. Someone's nicked a loaf of rye bread, and tisks ripple through the crowd like a gentle breeze through overstarched ruffs. The punishment? Here's where it gets creative. Stocks, for instance, a Tudor crowd pleaser. Detained outdoors with your head and hands locked into a wooden frame. You could spend your afternoon receiving affectionate offerings of spoiled turnips from passing villagers. A bad day to be unpopular. For acts considered more serious, blasphemy, heresy, poaching the wrong deer, there might be a public whipping. Or if someone was feeling particularly theatrical, your ears might be nailed to a post while everyone claps politely. In that moment, even the village goose has dignity you lack. But there's also the risk of treason. You know, the oops, I voiced a political thought aloud variety. And that one doesn't end in root vegetables. If the king's name entered your grumbling in the market square, well, best start practicing your dramatic last words. At the upper echelons of Tudor legal drama, we find the Tower of London, a grim, grey celebrity in stone, used for the politically inconvenient and the overly ambitious. The Tower didn't host prisoners so much as characters in a very gruesome play. From noblemen to queens, once you've crossed its drawbridge and that gate clangs shut behind you, your future was often a finely sharpened one. Though beheadings were generally reserved for the well-dressed, and even then, only occasionally executed with precision. It is deeply comforting to know that an axeman, should he miss on his first swing, would get multiple tries. You might ask, did that happen? To which Tudor history softly whispers, yes. Still, it's worth noting that the villagers who gathered to watch these events didn't come out of sheer cruelty. There were very few options for public amusement. No Netflix, no TikTok goat accounts, barely even a decent pub argument without risking a duel. So witnessing royal justice was like a particularly scandalous soap opera, with the added thrill of potential gallows. Legal records were kept, of course, mostly by men scribbling with quills over parchment, their handwriting looping like ivy. Trials moved briskly, evidence occasionally optional, and outcomes delivered with all the finality of divine punishment. It wasn't so much a system as a group performance. Actors in wigs whispering half-truths, overseen by local gentry deciding the fates of misbehaving serfs before breaking for dinner. And yet, despite all this theatre, the Tudor justice system was deeply tied to ideas of order, social hierarchy, and keeping peasants in their place. Which means, in simpler terms, that if you didn't own land, you were approximately as powerful in court as a slightly intelligent sheep. Might be best then if you kept your modern opinions quiet, avoided the bread baker's neighbour's cousin, mind the goose, and perhaps, for the love of all things woolen, keep your mole covered. As the court candle gutters and shadows lengthen on the timbered walls, you tiptoe out into the deepening dusk, the end of the day's justice echoing behind you. Somewhere beyond the rooftops, a nightjar calls, and elsewhere, a goose dreams of throwing a turnip. Best be getting along. The Tudor night holds secrets of its own. There's something oddly reassuring about the chaos of Tudor medicine. The way people back then approached illness with a mix of bloodletting, astrology, and sheer creative audacity. Well, it makes your last run-in with WebMD look like a masterclass in modern restraint. Let's say you wake up one dewy morning in 1545 with a sore throat. Not ideal, but you think, a bit of tea, some rest, maybe a lozenge. Except poor you, it's not 2024, it's Tudor England, and you've just reported your symptoms to someone who believes phlegm is governed by the moon, and your spleen is probably being possessed by melancholic vapours. You shuffle into the apothecary's shop, expecting help. And what do you get? A mouthful of crushed beetles or a draught made from boiled goose grease and elderflower. Medicine and cuisine in Tudor times were often separated by nothing more than wishful thinking. Ah, and the local barber surgeon, yes, the same man who cuts everyone's hair, is sharpening his blade with gusto. You might think he's prepping for a spirited fade, but alas, he's getting ready to give you a good, firm bleeding, because clearly your sore throat means your humours are having a tantrum, and the best way to restore celestial balance is to open a vein or two. Now, bleeding wasn't just for the sick. It was sort of the Tudor version of yoga. Everyone did it. Kings, queens, and commoners would line up for seasonal drainings. The idea was to clear your system of bad blood, both literal and metaphorical. As far as self-care routines go, it was a little more aggressive than cucumber water and a face mask. And if you were unfortunate enough to have something more serious, say smallpox, or the dreaded sweating sickness, well, buckle up. No one fully understood what caused these diseases, but people were more than happy to blame bad smells, unruly stars, your neighbour's cat, or that weird wind from the east. Treatment options ranged from sleeping with raw onions in your socks to burying pigeons alive near your bed. None of this helped, but it did keep the pigeons on high alert. Hospitals, too, weren't quite the comforting sanctuaries we imagine today. They were often funded by monasteries or wealthy donors, and primarily functioned as places to die with dignity rather than recover. Cleanliness, as a concept, hadn't yet hit its golden age. Surgeons might use the same tools from one patient to the next, with only a quick wipe on their breeches, and antiseptic was more an optimistic hope than a real thing. To be fair, not everyone was operating in the dark. A few bright minds of the period began quietly challenging the old Greco-Roman principles of medicine. Paracelsus, bless him, suggested that disease might originate from outside the body. Radical. He also experimented with chemicals like mercury and arsenic as medicines, which didn't help much, but at least he was trying. Herbalists and wise women, often dismissed or feared, carried richer knowledge of natural remedies. They brewed teas and poultices using plants like comfrey, foxglove, and willow bark. They could ease a cough or soothe a rash without drawing blood or invoking Mars in retrograde. Naturally, this meant they were occasionally accused of witchcraft and politely invited to a public burning. Dental care. Now that's a chapter best left undiscussed at bedtime. A gentle reminder, in the Tudor world, sugar was en vogue at court, and toothbrushes were for the wildly optimistic. If your teeth ached, your options included cloves, prayers, or a strong friend with pliers. But here's a lovely thought. Despite all the leeches, poultices, and heartily misinformed bile theories, people tried. They tried to heal each other. They tried to comfort the sick, even if that meant offering them a warm ale and a few cheerful leeches. There's something deeply human about it all. As the dimmed rushlights flicker against the timbered walls of your Tudor sick room, you, bravely bandaged from your third bloodletting this week, may lie back and be grateful that time did move on, that you, dear time traveler, might yet have a future with penicillin, hand sanitizer, and perhaps a slightly suspicious herbal tea. But the night still stretches on, drowsy and long, and we must drift steadily toward the next quiet chamber in our twilight adventure. A stillness has settled over Tudor England, like a velvet curtain drawn over the restless hum of the day. The candles flicker in their sconces, casting dancing shadows on low timbered ceilings. You, our time-traveling guest, are tucked uncomfortably onto a lumpy rush-stuffed bed that smells faintly of onions and 500-year-old shoes. You've just survived a long day of not knowing how to churn butter, bow properly, or navigate the perilous social etiquette of not laughing at someone's ruffled codpiece. And now, in this dim quietude, it emerges, the Tudor night. Not the fun kind of night, mind you. No moonlit strolls or secret letters delivered under ivy-clad balconies. The evening in Tudor times was a demanding, often pungent affair, laced with creaking floorboards, suspicious snoring, and a delicate undercurrent of plague. First things first, using the toilet. You've been avoiding this mystery all day, but now it can't be postponed. You nervously eye the ceramic pot in the corner, known gently, almost affectionately, as a chamber pot. It's indistinguishable from yesterday's soup tureen, and yet somehow worse for that. You pick it up gingerly, realize you don't even know where you're supposed to empty it, and decide to put it down again, firmly. Tomorrow is a new day for making enemies among the servants. Next, let us consider the bed itself. On a good day, you'd be sleeping on a rope-strung platform with a mattress of straw and, if you're very lucky, old, flattened goose feathers. On a bad day, and this is one, your sleeping arrangement includes damp walls, unwashed sheets, and a bedmate named Thomas, who is somehow both perpetually sweating and cold to the touch. You didn't ask for Thomas. He's just here. You whimper slightly and scoot toward the edge. Privacy, dear modern listener, is the luxury of the future. Back now, people sleep in groups, not for intimacy, but simply to conserve heat and nightmares. And though candles are expensive, the darkness holds its own costs. This very hour, someone is likely tripping over a chambermaid in an attempt to find the privy, which may or may not contain an aggressive hedgehog. One can never be certain. The night air, while crisp and poetic, is not something you want inside your chamber. Windows are shut tight with wooden shutters, and glass is for those born closer to a crown than a cabbage. So the air inside your quaint little quarters is recycled from a dozen dinners, 3 damp boots, and the slow, inevitable exhalation of Thomas. Sleep, when it comes, wraps heavily around you, like being hugged by a rug you cannot wash. The Tudor method of sleeping is an affair conducted in 2 acts. First sleep, then a gentle period of wakefulness around midnight, known as the watch. During this gap, some might pray, some might pray together quietly, and others might just lie there contemplating the eternal question: did I really just see a rat? Or was it perhaps 2 rats sharing a cloak? And yet, the quiet is mesmerizing. The muffled toll of a distant church bell, gently announcing a time you cannot read, floats through the timbered ceiling. Somewhere downstairs, a dog snorts in its sleep, and a calico cat, unbothered by heretical thoughts or taxation, does her rounds as the unofficial inspector of crumbs. If you listen closely, you can also hear the social hierarchy at rest. The lord of the house sleeps in silken sheets, probably dreaming of falcons and tax revenues, while downstairs the scullery maid is curled up behind the stove like a frightened muffin. It's a society perfectly arranged to keep everyone uncomfortable, but comfortable enough not to revolt, at least not tonight. And then, just as you're drifting into the ancient embrace of slumber, Thomas shifts beside you and murmurs something indecipherable about turnips. You close your eyes. You accept it. You sigh into the darkness, letting it brush gently across your face, like the wing of a dust-covered cherub who no longer gets paid to care. The Tudor night, in all its odd glory, stretches onward, mysterious, cramped, and strangely peaceful. Soon, morning will bring cold, struggle, and a breakfast of bread so hard it might be legally classed as a weapon. But that is for later. For now, breathe slow. Let the old world cradle you, lumpy as it may be. Sleep, while the chamber pot waits in the corner, and something else. A tale waiting just beyond the break of dawn. And so, as the candle sputters its final sigh beside your borrowed straw mattress, the one with something crunchy beneath it that you dare not investigate, we find ourselves at the close of your absolutely disastrous first day in Tudor England. You arrived hopeful, perhaps even excited, but a few hours later you had minor trench foot, offended a wool merchant's wife, who may now have you cursed for 3 generations, and accidentally implied allegiance to either the Pope or the King, depending on who overheard, which is too dangerous a gamble in 1538, frankly. But now the village is settling. The chickens have performed their last squabble of the day. A dog with 3 legs and alarming eye contact has finally stopped following you. You're safe-ish, warm-ish, and only partially sure you haven't contracted a flea-borne illness. A win by 16th century standards. Outside the wattle and daub walls, the noises fade into a medieval hush. You hear the occasional hoofbeat, the lilt of some drunken singing in a key only vaguely adjacent to music, and the wind whispering through thatch as if to say, yes, this entire roof is theoretically flammable. At the foot of your bed, which is less a bed and more a wood frame stuffed with despair, someone's goatskin shoes lie waiting, their owner snoring peacefully across from you. He's a friendly chap named Eldred, who truly believes he's 35, though the Lord and all his angels know he's probably 50 and very much losing a war with scurvy. You've learned so much, not just about the importance of bowing at roughly everything, including bread, the local priest, and a tapestry featuring Henry VIII looking extremely pleased with himself, but also about how quickly teeth vanish without modern dental care. Smiling too widely is frankly considered reckless. There's something comforting about the rhythm of it all, though. Meals arrive with clock-like unpredictability, consisting largely of things boiled until their personalities leave. But there's a grounded simplicity to the ritual of shared broth and coarse rye bread, of thick pottage spoon from a communal pot older than Europe's grasp on effective hand-washing. Outside, the fields slumber too, silent furrows bathed in moonlight. Someone will till them tomorrow at dawn, possibly with a homemade plough, possibly with one of the sad oxen who seems to wheeze when he moves sideways. Farming isn't for the faint-hearted or the chronically allergic, and yet, against all survival odds, you're still here. You've avoided dying of dysentery for now, and managed not to annoy the blacksmith, who, as local rumour insists, once knocked a man over with just a glare and a horseshoe. But tomorrow, you'll need a plan. Maybe apprenticeship with someone who doesn't handle hot metal or boiling dye. Or perhaps the monastery will take you in. They're short on scribes, they say. Not because of plague, of course. Although, yes, 3 scribes did die last week. Totally unrelated. Still, history hugs strange comforts. You've walked under a moon unchanged for centuries, heard lullabies hummed in languages lost to royal edicts and poor archiving, and felt the hush of a world lit only by flame and prayer. Tudor England may be riddled with danger, superstition, and frankly too many pies stuffed with undisclosed bird. But it's also a place of story, a place where the past breathes around you, musty, mildly confused, but very much alive. The final moments of your first day stretch gently across the dark. Somewhere nearby, a distant owl calls, or possibly a drunk trying to recite Latin. Hard to tell from here. You exhale, letting the smoky air of the hearth mingle with dreams not yet dreamt. And although you started the day terrified of rat-based plague and poorly understood laws about hat etiquette, you now drift through Tudor England in the dream realm, oddly resilient. One foot in history, the other snug under a scratchy woolen blanket, and your ears full of the crackling hush of long ago bedtime. Sleep now, traveller. You've survived Tudor England. Well, for today.